So all of the sacred spots will be loosened up, so to speak?
Heavily charged with energy.
Okay.
Waiting for us to come there to be the bees that pollinate the energy and take it away.
Wow. And so all of these pilgrimages to various places, there will be your local area will be restored.
Right.
And will there be new grids and ley lines created by the...
The existing grids and ley lines will allow to go back to their natural positions.
Oh, okay.
And there will be people that will be working for many years erasing the old fake grid.
Okay, and the false sacred geometry. Correct. And the false light codes.
Yes, that'll actually be a job of many of the people that want to go in service to Earth.
Okay, so...
Which is disconnecting the sacred geometry city system.
That's a huge task because it's been built up for thousands of years.
Hundreds of thousands.
Hundreds of thousands, right. All the city's names, the city streets, everything has been, pretty much...
Pretty much on the multi-dimensional design.
Yeah.
We are the original inhabitants of this land called Australia by the white men. We have been here since the beginning of time, since the dream time, when everything we know was created. My people know how to sing each and every place of this sacred country, while we contemplate G, the sun god. Each song is a living map which describes a specific path, the course of a river, a mountain or forest. If you brought together all these songs which are passed down from generation to generation, and which come from dreams, we would compose the map of Australia. At twilight, the humming of the didgeridoo, our religious instrument, reminds us who we are and what we are doing here. It is the beat of our tradition which keeps us united and attached to the land.
According to ancient Aboriginal belief, at the dawn of time, supernatural beings arose from the mud of a lifeless earth. Some took human form. Others traveled in the form of kangaroos, lizards, snakes, or birds. They journeyed over the shapeless earth, creating the landscape as they went, and giving birth to the first Aboriginal people. As they created the land, in their wake, the ancestral beings created a network of sacred pathways which stretch hundreds of miles across Australia.
People talk about the pathways that the Dreamings took, and certain places in the countryside are still believed to be potent or latent with the potent force of these particular beings that went into the land at certain spots. So for people today, these concepts are still very much alive and very much the focus for important rituals.
Today, the Aborigines live primarily in the north, central and western regions of Australia, the outback. An incredibly varied landscape covering over 2/3 of the continent. In the north, during the monsoon season, tropical rainforests are instantly transformed into treacherous floodplains. In the central and western deserts, where there are no continuous water supplies, temperatures can reach over 100 degrees each day and drop below freezing each night. At first glance, the outback may seem to be one of the most desolate and harsh regions of the world. How have these remarkable people managed to survive in such severe and unforgiving lands? In areas which even today are considered to be uninhabitable. The answer lies in the ancient wisdom contained within the Dreamtime stories.
They live a very simplistic life. They work on the basis that Pachamama provides everything that they need. And every time they find themselves in abundance, then they go into ceremony, which is to build these beautiful mandalas and then package them and then burn them. And this, of course, was lost to the world because these guys were totally lost to the world for 400 years. Because they'd been chased up into the high Andes by the conquistadors. And everybody believed that the conquistadors had murdered them. But they were living up in the high Andes at 16,500 feet. And they came out of the high Andes for the first time in the 1960s, when Alberto was a bag carrier for one of his professors at university. And that was when Alberto decided to change his course to anthropology rather than botany. And he became the anthropologist, and he's dedicated his entire life to working with the Cuero.
The elders of each tribe are the keepers of this knowledge. Through a lifetime of intense, secret and gradual initiations, they have come to understand the mysteries of survival. It is their responsibility to pass this timeless wisdom to their children.
We elders have the important task of initiating the young into our customs, explaining our history to them, and teaching them to respect the traditional laws. Our people, our culture, are the oldest in the world. We were already here thousands of years ago. We were around at the same time as what the white men called Homo sapiens. In these caves and caverns, we can feel the influence of the spirits of our ancestors. If you sleep here, you can see them in your dreams and receive their messages. They come and fill you with their strength, and when you wake, you feel very good. These are sacred places for us. In the past, people lived in caves and natural shelters like these. Across all our territory, you can find paintings made by our forefathers in which speak of the dream time, the creation, and how they lived 50,000 years ago. In the Kakadu National Park lies Ubirok, where the rainbow serpent stopped after creating the world and was painted on a rock so that people could see her.
When I left the corporations as an engineer, I moved into the high desert in the United States, a place called Nuevo Mexico, about 3,000 meters above sea level is where my home is. And there are indigenous people, native people in that area in the early 1990s. And it was during this time that this part of our country was experiencing the worst drought in over 100 years. No rain during this time. And a native friend of mine called me one day, and he said, "Greg, would you like to come with me to a place, a very special place, where my ancestors have gone for many, many years to pray rain? So would you like to come with me to pray rain?" Now, I like the language that he used, because he said this place is special because the skin between the worlds is very thin in this place. I like that language.
Well, since we are looking at the transformational properties of temples, let's see what happens when people actually interact with the geomagnetic forces that are actually found and proven to exist at these hotspots. Well, which is what I discovered when I went off to New Zealand one winter. I live in Maine, in North America. Anybody who lives there knows how brutal the winters are. And finally I worked out that the only way to survive in winter in Maine is to go to the southern hemisphere where summer exists. And I discovered when my first trip to New Zealand, and particularly this sacred site, which again is built by a mythical race of very tall beings called the Waitaha, which precede the Maori by thousands of years. It's one of the most profound sacred spaces on Earth. And if there's one place you have to go to before you move off this mortal coil, it is this place on the South Island. I can even give you the directions to it. It's a hell of a climb, you will not regret it. And I discovered that this energy really can have a profound influence on your state of awareness. And one of my sort of examples that I try to show is that when I went to this space, I wanted to find out what the connection was between Maori culture, or the culture that preceded the Maori, and also Celtic mythology, because I found that the art between the two people was so similar that it's almost interchangeable, and yet they exist on opposite sides of the world. And the thing that you'll find when you go to sacred sites, if you're very humble about it, is that you are on a personal journey, and the sacred site will respond to you in a way that is appropriate only to you. The information is always what you are searching for, okay? So when I got to this place, all I could hear in my head was, why don't you go and look for what lies opposite? And I had this vision of this line that extends to the other side of the world, and I thought, okay, it's very strange, it doesn't make any sense. I'll write it down in my diary, and I'll go home and process it. So I got home and I thought, maybe what they're trying to tell me at this site was that there's a connection that exists on the opposite side of the earth to this beautiful mountain temple in New Zealand. Well, that's not difficult to do. You get your GPS and you go on Google Earth and you put a pin, and would you believe it, you end up where you start, from where you started at Kuratauhiti in New Zealand, all the way around the world, you end up outside the Cathedral of Santiago de Compostela, which happens to be the Field of Stars, which is one of the oldest Celtic sites on the European continent. Lots of megalithic sites there. So suddenly I had an idea of the connection between New Zealand culture and Celtic culture, exactly as I had been searching for. And being human, you can't help but draw a straight line between dots. And that's what I did. And I found, again to my amazement, that when you start in New Zealand, the line goes right next to Ayers Rock, the only mound in the middle of the desert of a large continent, the most sacred site of the Aborigines, right through the temple of Borobudur in Java. You can't make this stuff up if you tried. There's a whole bunch of them that go all the way across Europe and Asia. The funny thing is, this trip occurs mostly across land. And all things being equal in the esoteric world, it's all about the balance of opposites. So I thought, what happens if you take the journey to the other side of the world? This is what happens. You go mostly over water, except for 3 pieces of land. Bit of South America, and I couldn't find any temples there, although that being said, it's mostly jungle. We don't know what's there. It goes right next to Easter Island, and there was Moai, looking at this ley line that goes back to New Zealand. And then it goes through the only bit of land in the middle of the Atlantic, in an island called San Miguel, our friend St. Michael, the friend of high places. Specifically, it goes through one of the only live craters of the Azores, of which only crazy people like the Portuguese would build a town in a place where you can't escape if the water starts boiling. You know what I'm saying? Talk about fatalism. And the line goes right through a town called Set Cidades, which means 7 cities. It's in honor of the 7 cities of Atlantis, of which this is supposed to be the remnants of. Maybe. But the fact is that the ley line goes right through the only church in the crater. This is how people over thousands of years were able to make this plan and implement it across the world. And it would seem that the interaction with places of power does accentuate your intuitive ability at these sites, because these insights are what eventually led to the transformation of the individual. And in this case, because I serve to teach, for me, my transformation is to understand this process so I can teach it better. As I said, everything is about a personal journey, and because these extrasensory experiences come from these temples, as well as the fact that you are receiving the knowledge of these temples, it's this combination that actually elevates your state of awareness of how the universe is actually created.
It's basically how you're going to survive in the bush area. Knowledge about what you can use, what's edible, what's not edible, you know, what sort of trees we use or plants we use for medicinal uses. And all that knowledge is passed on from your seniors.
We used to walk around in small family bands and take the food as we needed it. And the elders probably wouldn't know exactly where we were going, but as kids you just trusted your elders. But while you're going, they're teaching you everything that you need to know to survive.
The land offers so much. It's food, it's water, gives us shelter, gives us the wood that we need to make tools. So when you learn those skills and you learn about how country changes, you learn how to look after it as well. And learning those skills is through these ancestral stories.
From childhood, the Aborigines are taught the skills needed to obtain food almost anywhere. Surprisingly, in this land which outsiders would consider intolerable, the Aborigines see a garden of delights. Yet if their surroundings are harsh, why haven't the Aborigines tried to change them? Over the course of hundreds of generations, why haven't they cultivated the land, or built homes, churches or cities? Because the very land they walk upon was created by their ancestral spirits, the Aborigines believe that it cannot and must not be changed. They regard nature itself as holy. It is their cathedral.
It's an amazing feeling of, you know, just that goodness of being part of it. You know you're part of that. You know that is part of you. You know that this is you. And this is you. That is you. That rock face there, that cliff face. The whole of the tree is you. This grass is you, and every animal, insect and reptile is you.
I am the spirit that lives in everything. I am the voice in the cosmos, in the wind, and in the nature of all that is. I am also the voice within you, only you have forgotten how to listen to it in silence. Listen now to the message on the outside, which is important during the last days of this old world, because every ending is also a new beginning. As a spirit of this planet, you are a part of my being as much as I am a part of you. Through you, I have lived thousands of lives to gather my experiences. Concealed within you, I've experienced innumerable cultures and personalities within the eternal cycle of life.
Throughout the continent, inscribed in the rock walls of sacred caves, are primitive images from the dream time. The most powerful ancestral being is called the Great Rainbow Serpent. Even today, the Aborigines glorify her as the mother of all creatures.
This is an aerial view of Fortingall, taken by, I think it was in 1986, and these are held by the Royal and Ancient Historical Monuments Society down in Edinburgh. And you can see these arrows. There's a line running across. Let's use the pointer. There it is, there. It's running around here, fades a bit, and it comes through there. There's the yew tree. So this appears to be what's called a vallum, and implies there could have been a very early monastic site, possibly a Christian monastic site centered here, of which we've no historical record. So it could be very early indeed. And it's centered on the yew tree, which would have been highly venerated at the time of Christ in the early centuries AD. What we do know is that the current church here, there's a church right next to the yew tree, Fortingall Kirk. The current one was put up in 1902. Before that, there was a pre-Reformation church, and before that, we know that there was an early Celtic church site there going back to about the 600s AD. But this vallum suggests there could have been something there even before that. So the big question is, what was going on here?
When the armies began to march for Rome, for China, for Mongolia, they were conquering each local reality. Mm-hmm. And as they conquered all of them, they made roads to all of them and linked them to sacred geometry cities. Mm-hmm. They took away the unity consciousness and made disunity consciousness world. Mm-hmm. Because they were all centralized location to the networks of roads and dominating cities.
And that's also connected to the ley lines, right?
Correct. So it was to overwrite the ley lines.
Overwrite them, yes. They have been overridden.
Well, I traveled to London and to Wales and to Japan very recently. Can you tell me why I was called to those locations and if I did anything there? I felt like I was doing some work, but I just wanted to see what you have to say about that.
Well, you were drawn to London to resolve a series of manor roll issues. At about 2100 BC, right around that era, you were very big into starting new DNA lineages. So every time you died, you went into the astral world and found a whole bunch of other people that hadn't had a lot of lives on Earth yet and said, hey, let's go live in this London, Wales area in 2100 BC, and let's see what we can do if we can populate this region with people that are going to be connected to this soul family that's connected to this area. Well, you did that for thousands of lifetimes until the Vatican came in and completely altered all of the natural cities and sacred geometry of that area. The Roman army came in and wiped everything out, and then a whole new system came in and said the old belief doesn't exist. And you were called there to have the final resolution between all of those souls that incarnated from 2100 BC into about 300 AD into that area before there were the sacred geometry hijacking. So you were literally there. You were doing work, sacred spiritual court of equity work, not debt that you created, mm-hmm. but it is a way that everyone's debt that was created came to resolution. So it was a giant accomplishment that just to get there and to get it done. Huge, huge deal for your soul to get it done.
And if you follow my work on Atonism, you'll know there's no difference between the two. The Atonists, right, the Christians, burned the Library of Alexandria. That's right. This thing that we know as Christianity, this cult, couldn't survive if there was the old philosophies.
Sure.
Of the Druidic, shamanic way that says all men must know selfhood. That if you're going to come to our round tables, and if you're going to come to be a key part of society, we don't want you to be a faceless, soulless minion, dribbling nonsense.
Yeah.
We want you to be a completely sane, rational, enlightened, focused, naturally empowered person. Forget about heaven, study nature. It's in front of the universal force is already put before you, your greatest textbook. How can you be blind to that and then tell me you've got sanity? How can you abstract into your own mind, like the Eastern guys are trying to tell you to do, you see? How can you abstract from the world and think that it's evil when you were born into it in the first place?
Yeah.
Look at the contradictory, type of stuff that's going on here.
Yeah.
If you go back to, for example, the ancient Egyptian religious tradition, their whole concern really was with preparation for the afterlife.
That's right.
This involved intense spiritual journeys, which had to be made so that one could have experiences that would actually prepare you for the mysterious realms that lie beyond life, and that's where ancient Egypt is gone. We may refer to its books, we may refer to its literature, but the living experience of exploration of other realms, who can we turn to in our world today? Only to the shamans, who do that as part of their daily bread. That is part of their everyday life, is the exploration of other realms. And I often feel that we in the West, in the industrialized, the technological countries, are really children by comparison with the shamans. We're taught to believe that our cultures are so superior because of their technology, but incredibly inferior, in my view, in terms of spiritual exploration. And if we really want to be pilgrims in the truest of senses, then we need to listen to what the shamans have to teach us.
And you can better believe that in the shamanic tradition, they've got it. Because when you come in front of the shaman, the true shaman, that's what's going to be dealt with. That's what you're going to be dealing with, is the deconstruction of all of those false selves and shards. They're not going to be dealing with you as a collective entity at that point. They're going to be dealing with you as an individual if you've got it. And they're going to work to remove everything that does not have its roots in selfhood. Now, see, we have these very romantic ideas about these shamanic groups, as if, when we talk about the Native American Indians or the Druids or the Ammonists, the holy, holy people, and we still think of that of modern-day India. No. The collective groups, whether they're Native American, they're a bunch of mass-murdering butchers and sadists and greedy people like everybody else. When you're talking about shamanism, you're talking about a very small group, a tribe within a tribe. Same with the Druids. And they knew what the tribe was. Bickering, lost, contradictory. The shaman is a very different being. He's not part of a tribe. You see, he's part of the earth. He's part of something completely different, a brotherhood of men like himself, or women like himself. So that has to be dispelled as well, this romantic idea that all the ancients had something, wonderfully glowing about them. Not so. These people their job was to monitor the pestilence even in their own tribes. The dynamics, the unhealthy dynamics there, that was the first priority of the medicine man. If we are divided within, right, where you actually now are feeling that one part of you, you're disassociated from it, it's not part of you, it's not integrated into consciousness, then we have to find the internal adversary. And we know that it is. And it doesn't matter whether you buy into Freud's 3-part schemata, or Jung's 4-part schemata. It's simple. We know that there's a conscious and unconscious self. Many divisions. We have the persona. We even call people persons. Right? Here's a person. The word just means a facade. Even the very word refers to just a facade. And as I said, if you have disharmony within these modes of being, right, within the anatomy of your own psyche, some people have more, some people have less. If you have these kinds of divisions and this kind of disharmony, you're not only a weaker individual, you are now dependent on all the gimmickry that's going to come in and tell you how to gain it. So instantly you've lost your center. And then one thing leads to yet another and another and another, as you try to get out of the mix, out of the problem. As we said, the door to truth is narrower than you think. We are entrapped in a maze, in a web. And the strange thing about that web is that the more that you try to escape from it, the tighter it becomes. We're strangling ourselves often by our very attempts to be free. Who do you think loves that? Who do you think earns dividends because of our efforts, even spiritually, to liberate ourselves? Who earns points from that? Who is established from that? Do you see what I'm trying to say? That the bottom of the pyramid supports the top.
because again, I don't believe there's anything wrong with the world that we're living in. That world could be a beautiful world if we just made some corrections. We don't have to get off the grid necessarily and run to Timbuktu and reinvent the wheel.
Yeah.
We've already invented it. But it's just corrupt. Because there's no shamanic filter to get rid of the toxic people who are now in but don't get me wrong, the people who are at the helm of the world organization, structure, governmental, societal ship are not the creators of that ship. The creators of society's great things are geniuses. Right? These are the fine, the brains, the scientific and artistic and musical geniuses are the ones who create it. Then we use it.
Sure.
In the very the way Nietzsche exposed. Then it's taken over by, the middleman sort of thing. So you don't look at the genius of, making the big ships that go on the high seas, or the planes that fly in the air. There's nothing wrong with any of that.
No.
It's just that, man has become, he's lost the direction. He's become very apathetic.
Now, one of the reasons that this is, I think, so important to us right now is, as I said right at the very start, there's a lot of cultures that talk about this particular period in our evolutionary process being very, very significant. And probably the most significant of those cultures, everyone's aware of the Mayan calendar and the fact that we are now less than 30 days away from the end of a 5,125-year Bactun. But there's another culture that talks about this period without a specific date, and that's the Quero of Peru. And in 2009, I had this overwhelming urge to go visit the Quero. So roll the clocks forward to June of 2010. I arrive in Cuzco, and on my first night in Cuzco, I fall down the stairs and break my ankle. It was the altitude sickness. I'd stopped drinking a few years ago, so I haven't. I didn't, by the way, choose to stop drinking alcohol. I had a bad cold in November of 2008, and when the cold cleared, I just completely lost all desire or taste for alcohol, and I never fought it. So I fell down the stairs and I realised that I'd broken the ankle because it was at a rather strange angle under my leg. But I was so tired and I was so exhausted and so jet lagged that I couldn't be bothered to get up, so I just called down to reception and got them to bring up a bag of ice and stuck the ice under my ankle. The following morning, of course, I went to hospital where the doctor x-rayed me and then put the plaster cast on me. So I thought, this is great, isn't it? This is really fucking great. I've spent all this money, I've come all this way, and the first day here I've got a broken ankle. That's the left brain talking, of course. And, you can almost sense the right brain going, see how it goes, see how it goes. So the next day we're going up to Pisac, which is going to be our base for the next couple of weeks up in the mountains. And the schedule was that we were going to go out on trips, the buses were going to take us up into the mountains, and then we were going to go for these hikes up to these sacred areas, and the Quero were going to perform their ceremony. But I wasn't going there, was I? So I just got on a random bus and decided that I was just going to go as far as the bus went, and then I'd just sort of find a nice quiet spot and sit down and chill. And so everybody disappears off into the mountains, and I'm sort of, And I found a nice rock to sit on, and it was beautiful. And it's beautiful clear blue sky, no chemtrails. Beautiful clear blue sky, and of course, you sit there for a while, and then the left brain chatter kicks in, doesn't it? So, great, isn't it? Great. You come all this way, you spend all this money, and what do you do? You're sitting like a bloody gnome on a rock. You might as well bugger off and go home. And the right brain's going, whoa, 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 just relax, just chill, just see how it unfolds. So you're trying to get back into that place of sort of centered stillness and just sort of say, well, it is what it is, and, I might as well enjoy it. So I'd been sitting there for about an hour and a half, and I saw one of these guys start walking down the mountain. And I'm following the path, and I realized that the path comes right down in front of me. So I thought, this is interesting. And sure enough, when the guy gets to me, he comes and stops and just sits in front of me. And, sat and just smiled, okay, and then just sat down. I thought, this is good. Except that I couldn't speak Quero. If he did speak Spanish, I didn't understand it. Not that my Spanish is that great. He certainly didn't speak English. But we sat there, probably for about, I don't know, 45 minutes or so. And then a second member of the Quero came down the mountain and came and joined him. And now the two of them are chattering away. And I discovered that they did know one word in English. Idiot. And they seemed to sort of say it every time they happened to look down at my ankle. But I still couldn't communicate with them, other than like you do, you know, with just sort of him. Anyway, a little while later, a third member of the Quero came down. Now, this was the youngest member of the group working with Alberto. Her name was Velma. Very, very interesting lady. She was 38 years of age. She'd been struck by lightning 3 times and had the scars to prove it. And stated that every time she was struck by lightning, then it basically took her to a whole new level of consciousness. Don't try that one at home either. But she spoke perfect English, so now I had my translator. So we started chatting away, and I had these guys' undivided attention for the next 4 hours or so. And then we saw the other people coming down the mountain later on, and so we broke up. And then Velma came running up to me as I'm sort of hobbling along, and she said, Ian, tomorrow, she said, we will find you. And I said, but I don't know which coach I'm going to be on. She said, we will find you. Well, this went on for like 4 days, and I had these guys' undivided attention. I literally take a random coach, find a spot to sit, and then these guys would come find me after an hour, hour and a half or so. Well, I think it was the 5th day, I'm going back to my coach, and I got a tap on the shoulder, and it's from Alberto Villoldo. And he said, Ian, he said, when we get back to the hotel, can I have a word? Well, I could tell he wasn't best pleased. I said, yeah, sure. So I got back to the hotel, and Alberto was sitting in the bar, and I said, hey, you wanted a word, Alberto? He said, yeah. He said, Ian, how much are you paying these guys? Paying? I said, I'm not paying them. He said, right, I am. He said, I'm paying these guys to be up in the mountains conducting their ceremonies. And Alberto said, he said, look, you know, Ian, he said, everybody wants some time with these guys. And I said, Alberto, look, I'm just going up on a random coach. I said, I'm not even making a conscious decision about which coach I go on. I'm just going on a random coach, and I'm just going up to a location, and these guys are finding me. And he sort of half smiled. And he said, okay. He said, well, we'll see what happens. And the following day, these guys came and joined me again, and I told them about the story with Alberto, and they just burst out laughing. And I said, so what's so funny? I said, I just got my butt kicked by Alberto, and you guys think it's funny? And Velma said, yeah, because Alberto knows better than anybody that everybody's where they're supposed to be. And Alberto will just deal with it. So I had an amazing time with these guys, and of course I would never have had this opportunity had I not broken my ankle. It was a clean break. There was no problems with it. And I got back to the UK, went straight to hospital. When I got back to the UK, they put a new cast on it, and you know, within the usual 6 weeks, I was fine. But the ankle break was the catalyst to be able to spend the time with these people.
So how do sacred sites become access points into paradise? Because I really want to experience paradise while I'm still in the physical body without doing drugs. And, because they're very expensive these days. And what do these places do to you, and how do they do it? And that was my big question when I was writing this project. Well, paradise brings up the parable of Adam and Eve and their sojourn in paradise. And in the account that's given in Genesis, in the original Gnostic Gospels, that is, the ones that precede the official Gospels that were carefully selected by the Catholic Church, the serpent turns out to be the benevolent hero of mankind. And the God that's portrayed in the story is a shadow of the God of light. Now, being a good old Catholic boy, I had no idea that this was like this. The whole story was upside down in the way that I'd been taught. And in the original story that we discovered in Qumran, the conversation between the serpent and Eve goes something like this. This was translated in the last 30 years from Aramaic. What did God say to you? The serpent asked Eve. Was it, do not eat from the tree of knowledge? And Eve replied, he said, not only do not eat from it, but do not touch it, lest you die. And the serpent reassured her, saying, do not be afraid. With death you shall not die, For it was out of jealousy that he said this to you. Rather, your eyes shall open, and you shall come to be like gods, recognizing evil and good. Well, we know that Gnostic writings describe that once Adam and Eve had eaten of the tree of knowledge, they experienced enlightenment. And the knowledge empowered them to discover spiritual transfiguration. So this is the original version of events that were written before, closer to the time of Jesus. So as we know, the church's version is a little different. And it boots everybody from paradise, and we're still suffering from that collective guilt. But what I want to know is, why does a serpent look like Jack Nicholson? I love the fringe benefits of this research. You get to come across the most strange stuff. Well, funny enough, the same teachings are echoed in texts from Teotihuacan to Giza to southern India. That when you traverse the navels of the earth, you bring back the knowledge from the other worlds. And a place or person subtended by this meeting between spirit and matter in turn becomes a repository of that knowledge. So what exactly happens at these places? Well, apparently, this interaction changes the resonance of your body, just like an electrical circuit. And in that moment, your consciousness accesses a place called Paradisa, which is an old Zoroastrian word from where we get our wonderful phrase, paradise. And in the Zoroastrian language, Paradisa means a walled enclosure. I had no idea that paradise was a walled enclosure. Well, if so, how did you get in? Well, this is where etymology comes very in handy, because in Eastern tradition, an initiate of the temple who raises their state of godliness and masters discipline over the physical world is called a jinnah. And this word eventually migrates to Arabic as the word jinn, not to be confused with gin and tonic. And today we have that derivative called Allah Jinn. We of course call it Aladdin for short. Right, stay with me for a second, because the root of this word jinn, which there's the root of the actual word, it actually transmigrates to Arabic to mean hidden. Because, excuse me, actually, I'm going to go back a little bit. The root of jinn actually means hidden, okay? And that eventually morphs into the Arabic word jannah, or yana, which means paradise. And in Arabic, paradise is a hidden place beyond the physical world. Well, it's funny because in my original language, Portuguese, which is basically laced with Arabic, that word migrates to janela, which is basically a window, an opening in the wall. So, if Paradisa is a walled enclosure, in other words, a demarcated place that is beyond the normal world, and Jannah is a place called paradise, which is basically a hidden place, yes, it is paradise, it is a hidden place beyond the physical, then this place can be reached through a window, a hole in the wall. And in this, the temples actually qualify. Why? Because they define a boundary between material and ethereal space. And that window, believe it or not, is a place called the entrance. That's why you are entranced when you walk in through the entrance of a sacred site. It's written in the etymology of our language. Just like when you go to the end of the center of the building, you reach a place called the altar. Why is it called an altar if it's not altering you? 150 years ago in the British language, it was still being written with an E, not an A. Very new change. And at these entrances, as well as inside these walled enclosures, there does exist a stimulated electromagnetic environment which is measurable. And properly guided, this resonance does alter the body's state of awareness. So, how do we know all this? Because, like so many legends, the natives of Easter Island describe how 7 sages, all illuminated men, carefully surveyed the land before setting up sacred mounds at specific locations. Well, why these locations above all others? Well, the Hopi creation myth gives us another clue. Because one of the first people that was made by the Creator God, he goes to the South Pole with a drum, as one does, and he hears the heartbeat of the earth. And as he beats a rhythm in sympathetic resonance, the earth sends streams of life energy to the surface, and the earth becomes abundant with life. But, the Hopi say, there are some places on the face of the earth that became more abundant with this energy. And they call these places the spots of the fawn. And these were the spots that became sacred places. They became the navels of the earth, and eventually we built temples on these sites. Well, do these spaces really differ from the surrounding landscape? Well, yes, they do. And science actually acknowledges that sacred places are electromagnetic hotspots. Even gravitational anomalies actually occur on them. Let me give you a quick overview, because I know that saturation level can be a bit too much. Every dawn, the solar wind rises and intensifies the Earth's geomagnetic field. And this is a basic diagram of how it works. Now, at night, this field weakens, and then it picks up at dawn, and the cycle repeats ad nauseum. But there are places on the land where the geomagnetic field interacts with a second force. And this second force is what science calls a telluric current. We call them ferry paths, erroneously ley lines, because ley lines are geometric alignments, snake paths, whatever you want to call them, ways of the force. We all have different names for these spirit roads, but that's exactly what they interact with. And when these two forces come together during the day, they create a hotspot called a conductivity discontinuity. Horrible phrase. The Sioux in America called it scan, much easier to remember. And they'd say that where this scan concentrates, it influences the mind and elevates personal power in the form of spiritual attuning. This energy literally raises your resonance, because you are electromagnetic beings, let's face it. And it's stated by so many cultures around the world that contact with multiple places of power builds up a numinous state of awareness in yourself. The Chinese have a lovely phrase for this. They call it awakening the great man within. And it forms our culturally shared practice of pilgrimage. Well, the temple was considered the material dwelling place of a god, as well as its physical embodiment. So the integrity of the temple's energy was everything. And its defilement, whether it was physically or energetically, was seen as the precursor of the downfall of the spirituality, not just of the individual, but also the collapse of the entire tribe. So in addition to establishing a protective membrane around the temples, the builders also took huge precautions to ensure that your thoughts, or impure thoughts, did not pollute the environment inside these mansions of the gods. And there's this wonderful cryptic statement in the funerary text at Saqqara in Egypt, which hints of this relationship between you, the temple, and your passage into that place called paradise, that state of bliss. And it goes something like this. It states that 7 degrees of perfection enable passage from earth to heaven. And I thought, why 7 degrees of perfection? Does the visitor undergo some rite of passage prior to entering the mansions of the gods? Possibly. In Egyptian mythology, the passage into heaven is made through a place called Seket Yanu, and it literally translates as the field of reeds. And it is said to be a sort of a land of paradise. And we've come to know it today through the Romans as the Elysian fields, like place of bliss and paradise. And the Egyptians always said that to reach this much desired land, one has to pass through a series of gates. So at Saqqara, to enter this mansion of the gods, this beautiful old pyramid, you actually do have to first walk down a preparatory passageway. And it's a unique passageway because it's a colonnade of reeds which are separated by narrow alcoves, and each of these alcoves actually discharges bands of alternating positive and negatively charged current. And these positive negatively charged currents serve both as a barrier into the temple, albeit an invisible one, while at the same time influencing your body's electromagnetic circuits. So, as you're actually walking down the temple, you're actually being influenced by a positive and a positive negatively charged electromagnetic field. The funny thing is that there are exactly 7 of them. There are 7 of these gates. And suddenly the idea of those 7 degrees suddenly came into my field of vision. Because what you're doing here is that, you know, and when you go to Egypt, and if you do come to Egypt in January, you'll find this out for yourself. This preparatory hallway allows you to dispel all negative thoughts prior to entering the mansion of the gods, because, as we know today, your thoughts are electromagnetic. They carry a frequency. And if you're going into this temple, this mansion of the gods, and, you know, someone stole your car, someone borrowed my girlfriend, I have insurance to pay, all that stuff is being taken into that perfect environment, and you're going to pollute the mansion of the gods. Well, you don't want that. They went through a lot of trouble to build this stuff over thousands of years. And these are the 7 gates that allow you to stop and think and leave your trash at the front door. So by the time you get to here, down here, hopefully you would have been doing what the funerary texts say, which is, you will master yourself before crossing the threshold of each gate. Funny how they knew this 8,000 years ago. So could these be the 7 degrees of perfection that they were talking about? Possibly. Because the entrance into Newgrange Mountain Island is also protected by 7 positively charged nodes on either side of the passageway before you reach the altar and you are suitably altered. The same thing happens at the Cathedral of Chartres, and specifically the oldest part of the cathedral, which is the old Druid site, which sits just like Stonehenge with a big cup over a Neolithic place of power. Here you have the metaphorical 7 gates. 7 positively charged nodes of energy crossing that cup, that grail. So in my mind, this is how the 7 degrees of perfection enable you to have a passage from earth into heaven. They serve to protect the window into that walled enclosure called paradise, that state of bliss, so that the energy of the place is not polluted. And I thought we're really sort of making some progress on figuring this out and giving all of this esoteric information a lot of grounding, until I came across some astounding evidence from, of all places, Princeton University. And they have a very unique little group of people called PAIR. It's an acronym. It's the Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research Laboratory. You should read some of their published material. It is outrageous, because they were also, like me, really seeking to define that common ground between science and mysticism, to basically give some grounding to the things that we already believe, because we experience these. And a lot of validation that in temples one actually crosses a threshold into a field of heightened consciousness was actually discovered through a lot of their experiments. And one of them actually relies on the measurement of small changes in the behavior of an electronic device which they call the REG. And this little REG, to cut a very long story short, has been used in the Global Consciousness Project data collection. Let me put this into perspective. What they found was that by creating these little computer devices which measure how consciousness may influence events or precedes events, they put these pods all around the world to see if suddenly there's a spike in information that is recorded prior to major events. Well, only a few hours prior to the first huge tsunami that hit Indonesia several years ago, all these REGs in the world suddenly developed a huge spike, as if our consciousness had picked up this event already in the ethereal. The next big thing that they found was that only a few hours before 9/11, another big spike happened as well. So they knew they were onto something. And this is what I found when they began to look and conduct experiments in sacred sites, because what they wanted to find out, like me, whether the sacredness of temples was due to their collective use over time, or because they were imbued with a certain energetic energy to begin with, or because the combination of forces, such as stone or electromagnetism, or so forth, actually made them sacred. Well, during the initial experiments at a Native American landscape temple called Devil's Tower, and I guarantee you it's not called Devil's Tower by the Native Americans, the REG's output was demonstrably affected by a medicine man ceremony. Conversely, the effect of meditation groups at ordinary places like car parks or Walmart had absolutely no effect on the machine whatsoever, or very little, surprise, surprise. But in Luxor, in Karnak, and the pyramids of Egypt, the effects were 6 times stronger. In fact, they were the largest ever seen. And the results from 27 sites throughout Egypt were even higher whenever the principal researcher of the project walked around the site in respectful silence with a portable version of the machine in his pocket. And it proved to the group, and again, this is a highly scientific group that is peer-reviewed, it proved to the group that the spirit of place itself registers effects as high as the power emanating from a meditating group. So while the temples resonate at a high degree of consciousness, the combination of focus group veneration plus the temple created an expanded consciousness that had a marked effect on the machine. So now we begin to see how the temple exists to, and I quote, transform the individual into a god, into a bright star, because it generates the conditions that induce an elevated state of consciousness in the individual.
Lewis Hainsworth was the one that was recognized as the first to understand the relationship between brainwaves and Schumann's resonance in terms of the space and surface between the Earth and the ionosphere. By the way, my wife's website is Ionosphere, so you'll find her website even as interesting or even more perhaps than even my own, since she's in a broader category with Jungian psychotherapy. The electromagnetic field surrounding the Earth forms a kind of new body, which I will possibly suggest is an entity that we have yet to talk to and talk about. But it creates a form with solar winds, and the way they create it creates a special frequency of Earth, which is unique for the migratory pattern of birds. Our heart rate over the last centuries has evolved to have a length between the aortic arch and the heart, and we'll show that in another slide shortly. Here, I'm not even sure. This shows the resonant patterns between the heart and the brain wave. What's happening is this sets up a standing wave that hits the aortic arch, and it creates a secondary wave, which turns out to be precisely that of Schumann's resonance, and that's pushing against the temporal lobes, creating brainwave patterns. And this is how that works. And it's related to the Earth and its unique frequencies. Obviously, the planet Neptune would have a different frequency than Earth. Earth is quite unique. And I will remind you that despite what other people are saying, it is not changing. At least not at this point. The frequencies were all about Dr. Schumann's calculations of the Earth's ionospheric cavity, and the geometry, the physical geometry, is what determines these frequency bands that we're at. And they correspond precisely with the fact that the body can be seen as an antenna with a giant crystal on the top of it. It's actually full of amorphous semiconductors, liquid crystal phases, other forms that allow the brain to constantly be changing. We're going to talk about that next as the non-local mind.
Well, these magnetic fluctuations also reveal inasmuch why the temple builders regarded the temple as a living organism that sleeps at night and then awakens at dawn to the accompaniment of orations from the priests. You see, these magnetic properties are enhanced by the stones themselves, because we always wonder, why did they go to a lot of trouble to pick these huge rocks, sometimes from a long way away? Because these rocks all contain substantial amounts of magnetite. So they behave like weak, albeit huge magnets. Which finally explains why the designers went to so much trouble to source them, because the buildup of electromagnetism and magnetite has a direct influence on your body. It may come as a surprise that all the veins that flow through your body, which are filled with blood, are also filled with iron. And you remember that lovely experiment in science class when you take a sheet of paper and you put iron filings on it, and you take a horseshoe magnet under the paper and you watch the iron filings following the magnet? Guess what those stones are going to be doing to you as well? They're going to be moving that iron that flows through your entire body. But they're also going to be doing something else. They're going to be influencing all the millions of particles of magnetite that are suspended in all the liquid in your skull. And if that wasn't enough, just the change in frequency inside the actual perimeter of the temple is enough to vibrate the pineal gland, which is what creates the electrical charge that creates a chemical imbalance that allows you to have visions and altered states of awareness. And you can do this through music as well, or drugs as well. I want to talk about that. So, once you are immersed in this environment, this is how enlightenment is reached. This is how you are able to attain a kind of state of bliss. And when you reach this state of bliss, you are seeing an altered state of reaction, and you are able to reach that place called paradise, because that's how they describe the state of bliss. Paradise is being here on earth, experiencing an out-of-body experience while still having control over yourself.
So why did I need to spend the time with these people? The reason they came out of the mountains in the 1960s was because they had counted off 25 generations. Because they believed that their mission was to stay hidden from the world for 25 generations. And on the birth of the 26th generation, they came down to the lower world to share their insights. Their insight primarily is that the world is about to go through enormous changes. But we have a role to play. And they want to make sure that everybody, as much as possible, understands that we have to participate in this process. Because they said, even though they didn't know any of this, because they've been tucked away for 25 generations, they said the way that humanity is living on the earth today is not sustainable. I think we'd all agree with that. So something has to change, but we have to participate in that process. So they made the observation, they said, first of all, we have to literally participate as though the existing paradigm was going to continue. And the only way in which we can bring about change is literally getting physically involved and doing as much as we possibly can in whatever way we can to help bring about those changes. But they said that of itself is not enough. Because the other thing that we have to do is we have to visualize. We have to visualize. They're very definite here. This is not meditate, it's visualize. It's literally create the quiet space and visualize the type of future that you would like to see. And it doesn't have to be the same vision all the time. You could just be visualizing something for yourself, something for your family, something for your community, for your country, for the world, for the universe, whatever. A different visualization. But they say it's very important that we don't get an existential attachment to a particular visualization. Because if we did so, we might actually limit the outcome. Because we are limited in terms of our perception in this limited realm. So having too much of an attachment may actually limit the ultimate opportunity. And what they make the observation is that if we do both, if we make the time to sit down and visualize the type of change that we'd like to see, not the way in which it's going to come about, just the visualization of the ultimate goal, as far as we can possibly take it, what we will find is that things happen in our physical, empirical, material lives which actually help us to bring about those changes. And they said that this would actually be accelerated. Now it was June 2010 when I was with them, and they said that this process would absolutely accelerate exponentially with effect from November 2011. And they said, but Ian, it doesn't mean to say you can't start. You can practice. And they said, if you practice, what you will find is that from November 2011, things speed up.
So we're at this part where the creation of the Hollow Earth Network, the Agarthans, they're the essential. I've described Earth as having three timelines.
Right.
They're the above and below. They're the guardians of Hollow Earth. The Agarthan Network is the framework for the resistance of free Earth. The resistance of free Earth is how to get in here and plan your life 1,000 lifetimes ahead so that you're a manifest and co-creating being between 2011 and 2014. The Agarthan Network was set up during the last rise of Atlantis. They had understood what the Lemurians went through, why they were leapfrogging through time. They ultimately understood there was no winning. None. Right. So the only thing they could do was use their technology to help the people that were already caught in the system. And any new beings that were coming here telling them, no, you cannot come here, you will be stuck. This is the greatest sadness of Atlantis, is telling these beings you can't live here. The Agarthan Network was set up so that these cities leapfrogging, these air cities leapfrogging through time, would go inside the planet. And once they were inside the planet, those beings that needed to come here can come here in fifth dimensional or sixth dimensional status and still be close to their soul family and oversee them in dream space. So the Agartha network was set up to be the Dreamtime Defenders.
So, so the ninth pyramid fortification was the last one.
The last of the sentients of Atlantis that ultimately knew there was a corruptive force in their incarnation pattern that they could never prevent. That no matter what they did, the volume that was there, no matter what time wars they did, there was no chance for them to go back to the beginning and change it. So the only other choice was to go to the end.
Right, and the end is
now.
Now.
2011 to 2014. This is where all of the 2,300 species that have been doing time wars is manifesting everything that they're doing because they realized they couldn't go back to the beginning and change it, so they had to invest into the future or layers into the future. So all of their propaganda, technology, spirituality stuff all popped up just before the awakening, just before Earth pops out of the densest part and into the lighter part with the rest of the solar system.
The global plan by groups such as the followers of Horus was, and continues to be, believe it or not, the total empowerment of the individual through an ongoing process of self-realization. Because the ancestors always recognized that this experience that we're having collectively ultimately is a personal journey. And the more easier they can make it, they can make your experience down here. In other words, the more entryways they can give you to access other levels of reality while you're living in the physical body, it means that your experience on the physical world is made that much more important and more concrete. You have a certain degree of control over your life and the events that shape it. And as I mentioned earlier, the process is facilitated by the law of correspondence, where the temples are designed to mirror natural forces that produce a corresponding effect on the pilgrim crossing the threshold into each sacred space. And as a final example of just how far they actually went to help us experience paradise, I want you to leave you with this to think about. That when gravity influences particles to fall as a mound, they do so and they create a slope angle of 32.72 degrees. Which is kind of funny, because the same slope angle is found in sacred mountains, such as Mount Taranaki in New Zealand, or Mount Jefferson in Alaska, or Mount Fuji in Japan. And this reference to ancient sacred sites and this numerical value is even encoded in Mount Carmel, which is called the Vineyard of God, which happens at exactly 32.72 degrees of latitude on the face of the Earth. And believe it or not, this angle even finds its correspondence in human DNA. Because when thermal fluctuations produce bending and stretching in DNA, the angle of normal rotation of our helix alters from around 34 degrees to 32.72. And I want to know, how did they figure that out? That is quite impressive. We've only discovered this recently. And this correspondence was even translated to the strategic location of two major temples associated with the rebirth of light. One of them is in Egypt. It is called Akhet Aten, and it was built by a very strange pharaoh who was very tall with a strangely shaped skull called Akhenaten. And he built this place in the middle of the desert, seemingly for no reason whatsoever, after Heliopolis, the original city of light, had fallen into decay by the 14th century BC. And his intent was to re-establish the rebirth of the principles of light, and with it the illumination and self-empowerment of the individual, which had fallen by the wayside by his time. Well, it's interesting because we have very similar principles in the legends around Stonehenge, which eventually became a solar temple as well. And back in the old days, it used to be called Ambrosbury. And it's a Egyptian-based name, because an ambra basically is an Egyptian name for an obelisk. And Ambrosbury, it literally means an enclosure of obelisks in its original name. And we have now dated the origin of Stonehenge. The original holes have now been very accurately dated to 8,000 BC. Now that puts the formation of Stonehenge squarely in the same period as the followers of Horus, which are the tall builder gods, those giants that lived in the graves that we still find throughout the British Isles. And the correspondence here between these two places of light, between Archetarton and Stonehenge, linked to the exact physical North Pole of the Earth, reveals that 32.72 degree correspondence that also exists in human DNA. It's quite profound.
However, since we are actually fundamentally dealing with psychic dictatorship, and also awakening, as Peter said, the world's awakening, and as I said, selfhood, we have to understand one simple fact, and that is that the architects of control, the Black Lodge, they're not interested in the latter of those two things. They're not interested in the world's awakening, and they're certainly not interested in selfhood, but they certainly are very interested in psychic dictatorship. So then what? What do we do then? We got to realize that these people, the reason why they're not interested in it is because they are the least self-aware people imaginable. They are very much in their ego. In fact, they're not even really in a healthy ego. They're in what you might want to call malignant narcissism. And they're collectivists. They're into hive mentality. They're into groupthink. That's partly what that pyramid's all about. Right? That's the hive. The mitres that the popes wear. The beehive symbol in Masonry. They're all about the collective hive, where you're basically a shard, a broken self, an ego that relies on everybody else. You're part of a collective. You're not an individual. That's why they're against individuality. They don't have it themselves, because, to use a euphemism from Professor Tolkien, they've given themselves over to the shadow. They have given themselves over to the shadow. They are the ring. They wear the ring. Now, ring has many meanings. A ring can also mean a ring, a cabal of people. Right? One ring to rule them all. Check out the logos of the United Nations and the EU. You'll see a ring. Now, these people have given themselves over to that darkness, that Christians might want to use the word possessed. And therefore, they're not interested, and never ever will be, right, into things that we're discussing here today.